From the outside, my marriage to Chaik seemed like the dream every village girl was supposed to pray for. The kind of union that elders pointed at with approving nods because he was wealthy, educated, and carried himself like a man who had the world kneeling at his feet. But behind the carved mahogany doors of our big house in Enugu, my life was a theater of humiliation performed for an audience of men who laughed like hyenas while my soul withered. And it all began so slowly that at first I mistook it for love, for I believed, naively, that the teasing was a sign of affection. The loud jokes about how village girls don't know how to dress, or how my accent sounded too bush, were things he'd grow tired of once we settled into our rhythm as husband and wife. But instead they became the soundtrack of my days, amplified by the arrival of his friends who visited almost every weekend, filling our living room with the smell of expensive cigars and arrogance. And it was in front of these men that Chaik transformed into someone I barely recognized, a man who seemed to think my shame was a form of entertainment, the way other men might show off a new car or a shiny watch, and so he showed me off by breaking me. At first it was words, sharp and mocking. "Enemy, dance for us the way you people dance in the village," he would say, and when I hesitated because my legs shook from embarrassment, they would all jeer and clap until I moved awkwardly, my face burning, my dignity unraveling, thread by thread. But words soon proved too small for the spectacle he wanted to create, and so he started pushing boundaries. Literally. Sometimes a shove that made me stumble as they laughed, other times a slap so quick I doubted for a moment it had even happened until the sting settled into my skin, and though none of it left visible marks, it carved wounds so deep inside me that I began to walk around like a shadow of myself, convincing my mother over the phone that I was happy because a good wife doesn't wash her dirty linen in public. The same lesson she had taught me when I was a girl, but even she didn't know how dirty the linen had become, how foul the air in that house felt when I inhaled the scent of my own fear every morning, and I tried, God knows I tried, to make it work, cooking his favorite dishes, wearing the clothes he preferred, smiling even when I wanted to cry, believing foolishly that if I became perfect, he would treat me gently. But perfection was just another rope he used to pull me deeper into his game, for no matter what I did, it was never enough, and the more I bent to please him, the more he seemed to despise me, until one Saturday evening changed everything. His friends had come again, the usual crew of loud men who drank too much and found joy in watching others suffer, and Chaik, already drunk, demanded that I kneel in the center of the room and sing a song from my village. "The kind you people used to beg for food," he said, and when I hesitated, his hand came down so swiftly across my cheek that I heard ringing in my ears, but it wasn't the pain that broke me. It was the sound of their laughter, a chorus so loud it drowned out my heartbeat, and in that moment something inside me cracked, not like glass shattering in despair, but like a seed splitting open in defiance, and as I knelt there, my voice shaking through the song he demanded, I began to plan silently, carefully, my mind no longer clouded by fear but sharpened by the promise that I would not remain their puppet forever. I didn't know yet how I would do it, but I swore to myself that the same audience who found my suffering so amusing would one day gasp, not in laughter but in shock, when they saw the price of their cruelty, and as they clinked their glasses that night, toasting to their own wickedness, they had no idea that their little spectacle had birthed something far more dangerous than they could ever imagine. My resolve. In the days after that humiliating night, I moved like someone wearing two faces. The obedient wife everyone thought I was on the surface, and beneath it, a woman quietly gathering the fragments of herself, turning each shard into a weapon they wouldn't see coming, because to beat a man like Chaik at his own game, you couldn't show your anger, you had to make him believe you were still broken, still dancing to his tune. And so I perfected the art of pretending, greeting him in the mornings with a soft smile while my mind replayed every insult, every laugh, every sting of humiliation until it hardened into something sharp. I began to watch him more closely, noticing things I'd ignored before. The way he trusted his friends too much, how he bragged about deals that weren't as solid as he made them sound, and how he kept certain secrets from even those closest to him, secrets that, if exposed, could turn those men against him faster than I could blink, because loyalty among them was as fake as the love he claimed to have for me, and while he thought I was too naive to understand his world, I started gathering pieces of it bit by bit, listening to his late-night calls from the other room, memorizing names, dates, and figures as he shouted into the phone about business deals and debts he pretended didn't exist, and I quietly befriended his driver Emmanuel, A kind man who had always looked at me with pity but never dared speak. Until one evening when Chaik was away and I offered him food from the kitchen, he confessed what I already suspected. "Madam, Olga is not as rich as he shows," he whispered, glancing nervously around the compound. "He owes people dangerous money, and that was the confirmation I needed, because I realized my revenge didn't need to come from my hands. It would come from his own greed, his own pride. I started documenting everything, pretending to take pictures of my food for social media, while actually photographing incriminating documents." He carelessly left on the table, forwarding emails to an account only I knew existed, and slowly, like a patient hunter, I wove a web around him, even as I allowed him to keep thinking I was his little puppet, crying on cue when he insulted me, laughing weakly when his friends jeered, because nothing disarms a man like Chaik more than a woman he believes is too weak to fight back, and soon, an opportunity presented itself. His birthday was coming, and he planned a lavish party to impress the same circle of friends who delighted in my humiliation, a night he promised would be unforgettable. And he had no idea how true that would become, because I decided that night would be the stage for my revenge. In the weeks leading up to it, I reached out anonymously to a journalist I trusted from my days as a teacher before marriage had clipped my wings, sending her just enough information to make her curious, promising her that if she showed up at the party, she would get a story bigger than anything she'd ever written. And as the day drew closer, I felt a strange calm settle over me. Not fear, not anger, just clarity, like the moment before a storm finally breaks. And on the night of the party, as I stood in front of the mirror wearing the red dress Chaik had chosen for me, I saw not the frightened girl he thought I was, but a woman ready to reclaim her life. The guests arrived, laughter and music filling the house, and once again I became the entertainment, serving drinks, smiling as they mocked me, even as my heart pounded with anticipation, because I knew what was about to happen. At the exact moment Chaik would raise his glass to make a toast, the journalist and her cameraman, invited under the guise of being event photographers, would release everything I had given them. His debts, his scams, his betrayal of the same men laughing at my expense. And I would watch as the laughter turned to stunned silence, as the man who had built his empire on my pain crumbled under the weight of his own lies. And for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt powerful, not because I was about to destroy him, but because I had finally learned that the sweetest revenge isn't violence or chaos. It's forcing someone who made you feel invisible to be seen exactly as they are, weak, small, and utterly powerless. The night of Chaik's birthday party unfolded like a stage play scripted by fate, every detail sharp and deliberate, from the glimmering chandeliers casting soft gold over the guests' heads to the laughter that swelled like an orchestra of arrogance. And as I walked among them carrying trays of champagne, my face fixed into the obedient smile they expected, I felt a strange exhilaration, like standing on the edge of a cliff knowing that the wind behind you is finally strong enough to carry you forward instead of pushing you down. Chaik was in his element, dressed in an expensive agbada that shimmered under the lights, moving from guest to guest like a king inspecting his court. His voice loud and confident as he boasted about his next big project. His friends nodding with admiration they didn't know was borrowed, their laughter slicing through the night like knives that once cut me but now only reminded me of what was about to happen, because I had chosen this night not just for revenge but for symbolism. The same men who had mocked my tears would now watch their ringleader drown in his own lies, and as the clock ticked toward the moment I'd been waiting for, I found myself recalling every humiliation, every jeer, every sting of his hand on my skin, not with bitterness but with a sense of purpose, because each memory was now a brick in the foundation of my liberation. At precisely 9 o'clock as planned, the journalist arrived with her cameraman, blending in seamlessly under the guise of event coverage, and I caught her eye for just a second, a silent acknowledgement passing between us, a promise that the truth was about to breathe. Chaik, oblivious, called everyone to attention, tapping his glass with a silver spoon, his face glowing with pride as he announced, "Tonight, we celebrate not just my birthday, but the success of everything I have built." And the crowd erupted into applause, the sound thick with admiration. But just as he lifted his glass for the toast, the first image appeared on the large screen he had set up to showcase a slideshow of his achievements. It wasn't a photo of his latest project or a smiling portrait of him shaking hands with dignitaries. It was a scanned copy of a loan agreement bearing his signature, the amount owed so enormous that gasps began to ripple through the room like waves breaking against rocks. He faltered for a second, confusion flickering across his face as he barked at his aide to fix the mistake. But before anyone could move, the next slide appeared. Emails exposing his fraudulent deals, voice recordings of him mocking the very men standing in that room, calling them useful idiots he could exploit until they were no longer of value. The laughter that had once fueled his power began to turn sharp, suspicious, and then downright hostile as the evidence kept rolling, each slide more damning than the last, and I watched him unravel, his composure melting away like wax under fire. His voice rising in desperation as he tried to shout over the footage, "This is fake. Someone is trying to destroy me." But the journalist, calm and commanding, stepped forward and said, "This is the truth, and the world will know it by morning," holding up her microphone as the cameraman captured every second of his downfall. His friends, those same men who once clapped as I danced in shame, began to step back from him, their faces twisting with disgust and betrayal, and one of them even spat on the floor, muttering, "You used us." In that chaos, no one noticed me standing by the doorway, my tray of champagne now resting on a table as I finally allowed myself a real smile, not of malice but of release, because this wasn't just about destroying Chaik. It was about reclaiming the dignity they had all stolen from me piece by piece, and as the room descended into shouting, as cameras flashed and reputations crumbled, I slipped out quietly, the night air cool against my skin, carrying with me nothing but my newfound freedom and the certainty that they would never forget this night, not because of the scandal, but because the woman they thought was powerless had taught them the most unforgettable lesson of all, that even the quietest seed, when trampled into the earth, can grow into something strong enough to crack the ground beneath the feet of those who buried it. The morning after the party, I woke to a silence so profound it felt like the first breath after a long storm, a silence not of emptiness but of possibility. And as I lay on the narrow bed in the small guest room of a friend who had taken me in for the night, I realized that for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of what the day would bring. There were no footsteps to listen for, no laughter to brace myself against, no need to rehearse excuses for bruises that didn't show but hurt all the same. Just the soft hum of the city waking up and the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat, strong and certain, like a drum calling me back to myself. News of Chaik's disgrace had already begun to spread. Videos of his breakdown at the party were circulating online, his name trending for all the wrong reasons, but I didn't linger on it. His downfall was no longer my story to carry, because revenge, I discovered, is not the end but the doorway to something far more important: healing. I spent the next few weeks quietly piecing together a new life, starting with the small things I had once taken for granted: the freedom to decide what to wear without worrying if it pleased someone else, the joy of cooking a meal and actually tasting it, the simple pleasure of walking down a street without feeling invisible or ashamed. And each small act of living felt like planting a seed in soil I had thought was too barren to grow anything. I began teaching again, volunteering at a local community center where young girls came to learn skills and share stories, and in their eager faces I saw reflections of who I once was, bright and unbroken, and it became my mission to help them understand what I had learned too late: that strength is not the absence of pain but the refusal to let pain define you. Slowly, I rebuilt bridges with my family, calling my mother and telling her the truth, not to shame her for the lessons she had passed down but to free both of us from the silence that had trapped us. She cried, not out of pity but out of pride, and promised to stand by me as I forged ahead. Therapy followed, a word I had once associated with weakness but now embraced as the path to understanding the tangled roots of my fears, and through it I learned to forgive, not because Chaik deserved it, but because carrying anger any longer would only anchor me to the past I had worked so hard to escape. One evening, as the sun set over the city, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold, I stood on the balcony of my small apartment, a space that was mine alone, and whispered a promise to myself: I will not just survive, I will thrive. And in that moment, I understood that my story was no longer about what had been done to me, but about what I chose to do with the freedom I had reclaimed. Chaik's name might linger in headlines for a while, his face plastered across gossip blogs and scandal reports, but in time the world would forget him, as they always do with men like him, and even if they didn't, I had already moved beyond the need for his existence to define mine. My life now was a canvas, and though it bore the scars of everything I had endured, those scars were not blemishes. They were brushstrokes, shaping the masterpiece of who I was becoming: a woman who had walked through fire, not to be consumed by it, but to light her own way forward.